Hello and welcome to my next polymer clay tutorial, which is all about how to transfer an image onto liquid clay. This means that you can have an image that is on top of translucent and flexible material. So a translucent image basically, and you can use this for all kinds of effects. I'm just going to cover the basics today, and hopefully in the future I'll apply it to a few more interesting projects. For this tutorial you will need some liquid clay. I'm using Fimo liquid clay, and you can see the bottle here. Sometimes it seems to be called deco gel. You'll also need a smooth surface that you would normally bake your clay on. For instance, I'm using a ceramic tile, which is ideal. You'll also need your usual polymer clay equipment and tools, like an oven and a cutting blade. I'm also going to be using some silver micro beads, which is an optional extra. Okay, so let's get started. This is a really simple method, and first of all you'll want to preheat your oven to the temperature that it says on your liquid clay bottle. As you can see here, I've cut out a laser printed image so that there is some white paper border around the outside. Remember that if you're not using a symmetrical image, then the image will transfer in reverse. So make sure that you print out the image as a mirror of what you want the end result to be. The next step is to take your liquid clay and basically paint it onto your ceramic tile. Make sure that you don't shake up the liquid clay bottle because you don't want air bubbles in the clay. Take the lid off and draw an outline of the shape that you want. In my case, I want a square that's a little bit bigger than the image that I'm going to transfer. So I draw a square and then I fill it in so that there is a relatively thin layer in that square shape. So once you've made that layer of clay, you'll notice that it's all kind of bobbly. But if you leave it for a few minutes, it will flatten out on top, and that's what you want to do. You want to leave it until it all settles and lies flat. You then take your image, turn it upside down, and put it onto the liquid clay. Make sure that you place it correctly first time, so do this carefully. And very gently press that paper from the centre outwards onto the clay, because you want the whole of the image to be in contact with the clay, and you don't want any air trapped under the paper. You want to be very gentle doing this because you don't want to move the image from side to side, and you also don't want to press it down too much so that the layer of clay underneath flattens out and becomes too thin. Once you've done that, leave it for a few minutes again just to settle, and then put it in the oven to bake. In the case of Fimo liquid clay, you bake it at 130 degrees centigrade for 20 minutes. Okay, so this is what it looks like after it's been baked, and you can see that the image now shows through the paper. I'm holding the tile with gloves because it's still quite warm. I want to take the paper off before it gets completely cool, because I'm a bit worried that it'll stick to the clay. I will use my cutting blade to just lift up a corner of the paper, just enough so that I can grab it with my fingers without burning myself, and take it off the liquid clay. As you can see, it comes off nice and cleanly. One thing to note is the fact that wherever the paper was touching the liquid clay is now frosty. So you can see it has a frosted effect where the paper was, and then outside where the paper was is a bit clearer. So that's just definitely something to note before you choose what image to use, and also before you do this method. For instance, if you cut the edge of your paper all untidily, then that will show up on the finished piece. The great thing about this technique is it's translucent, so if you put a colour behind it, then you'll get that colour showing through to the front, albeit with a bit of a frosted look. There's definitely a lot of possibility with this method. For instance, you could use those battery powered tea lights behind it, and create a tea light holder because obviously most of the light will show through the image. And I'm also thinking about how I could use this to make a kind of stained glass effect. But I'm just going to turn this snowflake into a little ornament. So all I'm going to do is just condition some white Fimo Soft clay. I don't have a cookie cutter that's the same size as my snowflake, so I'm just going to make the best of it by using my cutting blade. And all I'm trying to do is make a clay border for my image. I want the inner square to be just a little bit bigger than my snowflake image. So once I've cut that out, I then use my scissors to even up the edges of my liquid clay. I cut it down to a small enough size so that it fits within the boundaries of my white clay, but big enough that it is still bigger than the inner square. Basically, I just want to frame this snowflake image in clay. I then use a tiny bit of liquid clay to glue the image onto the clay border. Make sure you don't use too much of it though, because you don't want it to squeeze out the sides and onto your image. If you get any liquid clay on your hands during this whole process, make sure that you thoroughly wash it off your hands straight away. I then baked the clay according to the instructions on the Fimo clay packet. In this case 110 degrees centigrade, however I only baked it for about 20 minutes rather than the recommended 30. Once that frame had been part baked, I then turned it over and added a little bit more liquid clay on the front of the frame. I then dipped the frame in silver microbeads. If you want to find these microbeads yourself, you just have to search for silver beads nail art. I found mine on eBay and they're very cheap and useful for polymer clay decoration. I just dip the edges into the beads. It does get a bit messy, but just make sure the frame is covered and then you get a beaded silver border. I'll be the first to admit I wasn't exactly putting all my effort and time into making this frame, as I was more interested in showing you the method of liquid clay transfer. So it's not that tidy and I can only apologise for that, but you get the idea. And then once I've done that, my ornament was almost complete. I just needed to bake it one last time. So once again, I follow the Fimo clay instructions, baking it at 110 degrees centigrade for 30 minutes. This should fully bake the clay. So there we go, there's my ornament fully completed. So I really hope that this has been a helpful video for you, and I hope it gives you lots of ideas for what you could make using this technique. If you have any questions or you try this technique yourself, please leave a comment below this video. So thank you very much for watching.